This is the No Stroke Podcast with your co-hosts David Dancero and Michael Garrow, helping you to support and thrive in life after stroke. Their podcast is designed for educational and community support purposes only and should not replace medical treatment and guidance of your own health professional team.
Welcome to episode 31 of the No Stroke Podcast. My name's Dave Dancero. I'm here with my co-host Michael Garrow. Hi, Mike.
Nice to be back, David. How are you on this fine Friday? Nice little summer afternoon here.
It is.
We're getting winding down the summer, though.
I know already.
I know.
And I sent you. I sent you a little post from the beach last night. So in kind of answering your question about how I am, there's nothing like just kind of getting your feet in the sand. But that shows me that we're getting close to the end of the summer when myself and my wife try to make these urgent visits to the beach. I'm an evening beach person. I'm not you can look at me here and see I'm not a sun goer. So, but got some time to kind of sit back and relax and reflect. And of course, I took it as a sign when I sent you that photo of the seagull that sat down next to us, looked just like Wilson. You have to go back to the beginnings to know what we're talking about there. But, and also, you know what, Mike, my wife surprised me with a brand new pair of running sneakers. So it was like getting new treads on a car. I went out and it gave me a boost, and I got out there and got an early morning run in, and she knows that I don't buy stuff for myself, so she treated me to that, and I'm very appreciative. So life's good right now.
Look good, feel good, play good. That's the way it is, man. Well, that's nice. You got out and got a bit of evening sunset there on the beach. Lucky man.
Yeah. How about you? How you doing?
Yeah. Happy again, wrapping up summer. So little, it is what it is though. You get through the summer and the dark and cold months come.
Yeah.
I think we'll be fine. Let's jump into this. So this week's guest, we have a gentleman, Ralph Preston, really, really interesting guy. We'll let Ralph take over, talk through his story here in a bit. But he's done a great job to like we always say, take control of life after stroke. And he's a guy that 100% did that, as a stroke survivor, and really building this community around him and some of his advocacy. So yeah, thrilled to be able to have Ralph on, and hopefully being able to continue and do some more work with both of our communities in the coming months. But let's go to it. I know you have a couple of things for in the news. I have one bit that kind of highlights some of the work that I talked about with Hyperfine and Viz AI last week, but I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And agree, the guest coming up is fantastic, and we'll dive into that very soon. In the news for me, especially on in all the advocacy we talk about, treating upstream and talking about prevention and treating the whole person. This really caught my attention, and I hope to have this individual pinged him. Hopefully, we can get him on our show because he's doing some great work. His name's Rick Severin, and his post caught my attention because I hope I said his name right, by the way, but he's talking about the advocacy, the work that they're doing, and it's starting at the state level right now. But there's a motion that's presented by Illinois from Chicago, is an Illinois delegation. It's really trying to push having PTs have a say in how they're able to screen and manage blood pressure, and early on, like let's just state facts here in the relation to our show and stroke. Other than smoking, right, the biggest secondary risk factor, and it's a silent risk factor, and hence the reason I want to bring this up, is that it's high blood pressure or hypertension. The stats are overwhelming. Something like 75% of the population now are either pre-hypertensive or hypertensive. So the motion that he's starting is to get some momentum around having PTs almost incentivized, and what I mean by that is have a billing code so that they can actually screen and put it as part of their practice. And that to me would be, it's exciting, but it's also something that would maybe, what brings it back upstream is it gives us the ability to take the time and actually do that. so that we can, they don't call it a silent killer for nothing. I could look at you, Mike, and not, just assume that your blood pressure is fine, but it could be in a dangerous level. So unless we screen, and then as therapists, it's always been something I've always done, but rubbing shoulders with other PTs, and especially in the outpatient clinic, not a lot of PTs do that. So that in combination with the upcoming, the remote therapeutic codes, I really think the blood pressure management and monitoring is something that is vital, and it will allow time. Because if you look at, if I ask 10 PTs, and especially in outpatient setting, why they're not screening for blood pressure, it's time, and it's, to me, it can minimize risk and allow for early intervention. So I'd love to get him on. And I said I pinged him. I found out that he also has a podcast too. So I think it would be a great event, because his area is cardiovascular, cardiopulmonary PT. So he'd be the person, the expert to bring in to further this discussion. So that's kind of my in the news that caught my attention.
Cool. Yeah, that's super interesting. Hopefully we could get him on. Yeah, just as a quick follow-up from last week, and it goes sense to what you'll hear from our guest Ralph here in a minute. Ralph, and like many other folks who have a stroke, you have a short time window to get to the hospital and get treatment. And oftentimes, you could land in the hospital and they don't have an MRI machine ready for you, or they don't have the staff ready to kind of take care of this, and get you the treatment straight away, often because they don't know for sure if it's a stroke, right? So what's interesting with this group partnership that I talked to last week with a company called Hyperfine, they've created a mobile MRI machine, right? So this goes directly to the bedside, and is paired with technology from a company called Viz.ai. And Viz.ai have created this machine learning technology that can accurately and quickly predict, based on the image, if it's a brain bleed or now both a hemorrhagic and ischemic stroke. So it's great technology, and I was able to dig in a little bit more over the last week and found an article stating that there's a hospital system out in Ohio that just implemented this mobile MRI scan, one of the first in the country, and doctors are reporting a cut of 20 minutes for patients being able to get this scan, rather than having to go to where there's the large scale MRI machine. They use a different type of scanner that is a bit more portable. It's a lower magnetic field, and it's able to just go straight to the bedside. So to cut 20 minutes off in a patient who might have stroke symptoms, to be able to get them that TCPA, like that's a big time move. And I think, we'll only see that continuing to increase. So amazing piece of technology. And I hope it's something, that could get into hospital systems and stroke centers across the country and across the world.
Yeah, that's really exciting information. And especially in light of what was mentioned by our guest, which we'll jump into in a moment here, about in telling his story, how long he kind of waited too, after being nudged to get into, by his doctor to go get to the hospital when he suspected something was happening that wasn't right. And he did wait a bit, right? I think he was over an hour. So to get that scan. So really, I know we've talked around this a little bit. It'd be really great to get that company on as well. So yeah, so two good kind of in the news recaps there. Do you want me to just do a brief intro and then we'll get into Ralph? So yeah, so Ralph Preston reached out to me initially after we would sort of a joint promotion that was going on social media around showcasing survivor stories, and he reached out, and I eventually went on his show. Ralph Preston is a stroke survivor. He had a hemorrhagic stroke in his late 50s. And from that point on, he really took action. I want to say that, when I say action, I'm just going to give some examples because he can tell his story the best. But when I say take action, he founded a group called Stroke Buddies in response to all the barriers that he experienced in his own care. And when I say some of the action points that in some of his descriptors, I'll just go after this, but basically, he's already posted over 100 videos in his group on specific. He found one of the things that he left therapy and not had a lot of video education to continue his therapy when it stopped at home. He's posted over 100 personalized videos. He's done over 50 podcasts and crossover podcasts. So it was great to have him, going to be great to have him on today. And he puts up over 2.5 hours of content on Zoom and his multiple survivor and support groups that he does. And he has breakout groups that I learned from being a guest on mindfulness, nutrition, some of those unmet needs. But I love his story. When I originally heard him speak, and he talks about being frank, like jump on it, like get on your recovery. And he happened to have an exercise background, and we had some great dialogue about the athlete's mindset, and he went to the areas that really that we've talked about too. There's going to be bad days with stroke, and kind of not get over it, but you have to set goals, and not every day is going to be a good one, but and pay attention to how much time initially he put into his own recovery and getting on it. So I could go on and on, but I think it's best to. Do you have anything you want to share there before we jump in?
No, I think you said it well. He is a guy, like I said earlier, and you just reiterated, took action after stroke, took control of his own journey. And it's something that a guy like him, he needs to be able to kind of have that voice, and he's done a great job to take a leadership role, and it's helping his recovery, but really helping others. So yeah, let's jump into this one. It's an exciting one, and anyone who's interested in joining the Facebook group for Ralph, if you could just search for Stroke Buddies on if you have Facebook, and you could also go to the show notes here at wherever you're finding this podcast. We'll put a link to it. All right,
perfect. Let's welcome Ralph into our show.
Welcome, Ralph, to the No Stroke podcast. We set the stage in our intro, talking about all the great work you're doing. And I was on your show, Stroke Buddies, a few weeks ago with your community. And I thought, great opportunity to bring you on. And you've met Michael earlier. And I wanted to welcome you to the show. And please tell us a little bit more about your background, what you do professionally, and perhaps a little bit more about your stroke and your survivor experience.
Okay, well, I've been a videographer, primarily a videographer, but I'm also a still photographer. But I did mostly video work, and I was also a video technical director at live shows after I sold my company, my video company. As far as what changed in my life, I took about a 1-year kind of hiatus. I did accept a few jobs during my recovery, but I mostly focused on my recovery, and then I pretty much went back into what I was doing, being a producer, shooter, editor, and also doing the live events. But in terms of, I started doing stuff personally for a long time. I'm a contractor, if you will. I never did video much unless somebody paid me to do it. And I started doing, I realized that I want to do good with my video camera in terms of the stroke world. I've been doing nonprofit videos for 35 years, and I've always given back. And so I pointed the camera at myself and started generating stroke content. But I'm still a storyteller, and so in a lot of ways, I'm using my skills and storytelling ability to just change subject matter. Now, dealing with trying to provide good stroke information rather than promoting a product or making a benefits tape or whatever, all the things that I used to do. So let's see, about my stroke. I had a hemorrhagic stroke on the right side, right about there, left side affected. I was on my, I had, you might appreciate this, David, I was on my exercise my bike, well, regular bike on a trainer, a carbon fiber bike on a trainer. I had 15 seconds left to go, 44:45 into a 45-minute ride, and all of a sudden my legs didn't want to go around right anymore. And I said, this is weird, but I only have 15 seconds left, so I'll just get off. So I got off and I did some of the goofiest walking of my entire life. The first few steps, I dragged a foot, and I said, whoa, that's no good. And I went to lift it up. I think I lifted about a foot off the ground, and I dragged it again. And after about 3 of those, I knew what happened. I called my doctor. He said, go to the hospital. I walked in the hospital. I sat there for about an hour and a half till the CAT scan. And they said, well, okay, time for the CAT scan. I went to jump up, and no dice. Couldn't move. Kept having the stroke, I guess, in the hospital. So one of the things you asked was about what were the biggest barriers that I had. I actually got asked this question recently, and I wrote them down, and then I did a poll in a couple of stroke groups. I'll share that with you if you'd like. Anyway, I could put these in order for me, but these are in no particular order except the order I thought of them. I think the biggest issues for stroke survivors are motivation, depression, mobility issues, everything from getting to the bathroom and doctor's appointments to learn how to walk again. There's almost no or limited access to information that we need as stroke survivors. You get out of a rehab hospital, you lose a lot of your contacts. I hear occasionally, this wasn't an issue for me particularly. I did have to ask my family to just let me do things, stop trying to do things for me, but unsupportive family is an issue for a lot of people. Some people have financial issues because they lose their jobs and end up on some type of disability, SSDI or other. Then the other ones are pain, chronic nerve pain, fatigue, brain fog, whatever you want to call it, neurofatigue. A lot of people deal with spasticity and also with insomnia. I didn't have a problem with insomnia, but it's a problem for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and that list is long, as we know, and we've touched on a lot of those subjects in a vacuum. But I know, Mike, I know you looked like you wanted to ask a question there. I have one, but I'll let you jump in here because this is really fascinating.
Yeah, Ralph. Let's kind of go back to, when you were discharged and you were coming out of the hospital, what was it, on that list? What were some of those, factors that you were having to deal with initially?
Well, I mean, they sent me home in a wheelchair. And so, mobility was a big issue for me because it was important to me to get out of it. And in fact, I said about 4 or 5 days in, every time I sat in a wheelchair, I kept having this creepy feeling like the more you sit here, the more likely you are to end up sitting here. I didn't like it at all. I said something to my wife, and she said, well, we'll just fold up the wheelchair and put it out in the laundry room. And I went, well, I kind of can't make it across the room at the moment. And she said, we'll help you. And we actually did that. I don't think I crawled more than once or twice. I did a lot of wall walking in the beginning. So mobility was a big issue for me. Motivation's an issue for everybody, and so I'll talk about that. I'm a pretty intense individual. I had some trouble with depression and motivation, but it was spotty, thank God. You know, the one thing I had bad days, and I'm glad I didn't string together a bunch of bad days. I typically, have a bad day, the next day it'd be okay. So I came up with this concept when I was having a bad day of, dive to tomorrow, fake it till you can make it, whatever you want to call it. But it was an issue because I had to tell myself, look, if you want to get out of this wheelchair, this is what you have to do, and you have to stick to it. I'm an athlete. I believe that people that have trained for as an athlete do better in stroke recovery because they understand setting the goal way out there. They understand that you don't take a tenth of a second off of your whatever time, the next day, the day after you set a goal. If you're trying to take a minute off of your 5K time, that could take you a year. So they understand setting long-term goals, and I did that, and I actually, believe this or not, it's the truth. I worked 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, 7 in the morning till 7 at night. Every hour on the hour, I did something. Every other hour, it had to do with walking or leg exercises, and the other hours I split between my shoulder, yep, that's my affected shoulder, and my hands, yeah, that's my affected hand.
Yeah, that's so important, Ralph. That was one of the questions. I'm glad you touched on that because I wanted to ask how important exercise was or your previous background in your recovery. And you really, I loved when in our previous conversation now you said, I just got at it. I got at it, and in the time and the volume that you dedicated, the foundation you had as exercise. You mentioned in recounting your stroke that you were actually on a bike when it happened. How frequently were you exercising, prior to your stroke? Because
I was actually training for the senior games. I lived in a small town. I like to exercise. I was doing some jogging along the Greenway, and I just decided, hey, I'll do a few running events and a few biking events. So that's why I was on my exercise bike. Well, I was a maniac in my recovery. I'm not that, well, I was when I trained for and did some sprint man triathlons, but I wasn't being that much of a maniac about it at 58 years old. I was probably working out 3 to 4 days a week, every other day. Riding my bike, taking a jog or two. So, regularly.
Yeah.
Regularly.
So definitely goal oriented. You had a goal that you were going for at the time. So that kind of maybe helped translate into setting new goals after stroke. The question, when I asked the difference between the 2008 and the 18, when you described how you turned the camera on yourself, talk a little bit about why that was in your discharge, because I found that very interesting that you felt there was perhaps not the best resources coming from the rehab side, therapists, whether it be OTs or PTs, in terms of providing educational content for you to continue to learn once you went home.
Yeah, I have a meme that I made up in 2009, a year after my stroke. It says something like, stroke survivors, we need better access to information and resources. So, I mean, it hasn't changed. I posted that meme. I posted a couple months ago in my group. It says 2009 on it. So it's, things haven't changed all that much. In terms of resources. Why did I point the camera at myself? Well, okay, I'll make this as brief as I can. So when I got out of the hospital, when I was in the rehab hospital, 2 of my friends say that I told them before I left was discharged, I was already talking about helping other stroke survivors. I have zero recollection of that, but when they both told me, I said, kind of sounds like me, doesn't it? And so, I got to believe it's true. And I did spend about 15 months being a maniac, doing that 10, 12-hour a day stuff, and I got completely turned off to the whole thing. One day I just said, I am tired of pulling on rubber bands, and I moved into a more of a maintenance mode and more of a what you would call functional therapy mode. I call it the left hand Olympics. I tried to do everything I possibly could with my affected hand, and I didn't shy away from walking or doing anything. And but to get back to why I turned the camera myself. So almost immediately I had this idea that I should produce the definitive set of DVDs on stroke recovery, which I knew very little bit about, but I've also been hired many times to make videos on new products I had to learn about. So I just figured I'd learn it and make this definitive DVD, and we should hand one to all 800,000 people as they left the rehab hospital. Well, I put together a proposal, and it was really well received at a number of hospitals, but in order to talk to a half a dozen neurologists, go into physical therapy clinics and everything, it ended up many hundreds of thousands of dollars, and nobody was really willing to sponsor it. Every hospital would say, well, we got $30,000, you can use our doctors, you can shoot here. They all said, you've identified a gap that we're aware of. And, but I couldn't put together a consortium. I got really close with the Medical University of South Carolina. One department had half, and the other department decided they didn't want to put up the other half. And then I got with Tri-State Stroke Network, which was funded by the CDC. They loved my idea. We were working towards financing it and starting it when the CDC, in their infinite wisdom, that's sarcasm, pulled the plug on all 5 regional stroke centers. Yes, they did. Thank you very much, CDC. So, after 3 or 4 years, my idea of doing this kind of went in the toilet, and I am somebody that likes to do what I say, and I became increasingly embarrassed that after 4 or 5 years, I had not made any kind of video product whatsoever. So I said, okay, I've never been on a camera before. I hate it. I always stay behind the camera. But I decided, Ralph, you own a camera, you own an edit system, you know how to do this, you're a stroke survivor, you don't want to hire somebody else who's an actor. They don't know what they're doing. You'd have to convey everything to them. You have to do this yourself. So I planted the carrot myself and started making simple exercise videos. I'm not a PT like you. I have a fair amount of in-life practical training, and I work with some stroke survivors in person, doing physical therapy with them, taking them to physical therapy, taking them to the therapy pool for as long as 5 years, but I don't have any real education. So, well, when I said that once to a friend of mine, that she said, I believe you have the ultimate degree, meaning I had a stroke. So I I stick to simple things. If I don't know what I'm doing, I don't do anything. I don't ever prescribe anything or tell anybody to do anything or get too radical. So basically, most of my exercises are stuff I either learned physical therapy, I adapted from physical therapy, I made up myself that are an adaptation of standard exercises, or in some cases I learned things about brain patterning and things that I did in my recovery that I interject. I've got one, for example, where I show you I go hands-free on something, and I don't do it very well. So I do a light touch. I put my fingers on, I pattern my brain like 5 times, and then I do it 5 times perfectly, right on camera, live, one take. I leave in, if I screw up, I generally leave it in. We don't do takes. I want people to look at my stuff and go, oh, he's got shake in his hand, I still see a little bit of hip weakness there. You would. My credibility comes from being a stroke survivor. And there isn't anybody else out there that I see. Michelle Jensen, maybe. There are a lot of amateurs, a lot of regular stroke survivors who occasionally post a video to Facebook groups and stuff. But there are only a few of us that are really stroke survivors that are trying to generate, real exercise videos, things that benefited us. And I've gone on. I've got a video on everything I did. So I started doing stuff on, the McGee Big Three and different kinds of crunches, how to activate your glutes, stuff like that. Everything that I learn, I translate into more videos. I've got over 100 videos on exercise, and I'm on podcast 48 the other day, 49 next Tuesday. I do a roadmap series. We're at 25. We're on number 4 of the breathing class. I also generate about 2.5 hours of Zoom content a week. On Tuesdays, we talk to PTs like we did you, or scientists, neuroscientists, coaches. It's basically, I'm trying to bring science and real knowledge that I found was really lacking. When I left the rehab hospital, there was no neurologist or anybody to talk to. Oh, in 2 weeks, I have a neurologist coming on for the first time, a stroke neurologist. So that should be interesting. So
It's amazing. So yeah, and I think like what you keep talking to here, Ralph, is like your relatability, right? Like Survivor. So my mother had a stroke at 28 years old, and she was put into a convalescent home with a bunch of, at the time, people 40 plus years older than her, Yeah. So I think what you've created, and I'd love to kind of dig more into stroke buddies and the community that you've created over the last few years. But I want to start with why you think, you've been able to scale this so well. And, I think a lot is to kind of what you've talked to, your relatability, your personality, your lived experience, and that ability for a stroke survivor to see you and say, okay, I'm comfortable with this, right? It's not some PT, it's not somebody who hasn't kind of been in my shoes. So just talk to that, a little bit of, how you engage with your community and what's helped you over the years.
Okay, well, I mean, I kind of applied. I'm a really intense individual. I mean, I was like off the friggin' charts before my stroke, and this is the calm down version of me. I mean, I'm looking at you and I'm talking. I'm going. I've been talking for like 6 minutes. I need to give this guy an intro point here into this conversation. Anyway, I kind of brought my same intensity to the whole thing. I've been doing it about 6 years. The group stuff. I've built up a group to 8,000 people. It's back to the how do you move the stroke elephant thing. You just keep pushing. I used to say, until I had an interview with Brian Harris, and I interviewed each other, and he used push the elephant. I used to say push the rock uphill. I get up every morning and push the rock uphill. So that's how I did it. My greatest asset in this world, in terms of my leather shop, my video business, my stroke work, everything I do, it's because I'm successful because I'm a plotter. I don't give up. I don't worry about what I get done during that day. I just work at it all day, and all of these things I didn't get done today, they'll be there tomorrow. Obviously, I have deadlines on some of the shows and things that I have to. So that's how I was successful. The other thing is, especially in the beginning, I answered probably 100, 200 questions a day in about 10, 12 stroke groups. Now I'm a member of 20. I don't do that so much, but I also provided real world answers to everybody. And I kind of became known for giving out, reasonable, decent, I hesitate to use the word good on my own advice, but, decent advice. And and I dragged people over into my group, Stroke Buddies. Anytime I saw anybody posting a video, being a video producer, I think the most powerful thing you can show another stroke survivor is somebody at home, in the at-home setting, because I believe we mostly get better at home. Somebody shooting a video of themselves, trying some new exercise or having some success or just trying to walk. because it gives other people hope. It's back to me again. They see themselves in that person. I think that a lot of people they know I'm not BSing them in any way. I walked the walk. I can send you the pictures. They sent me home in a wheelchair. It was no fun. I think also that my success, people want hope. Even people that know way down deep in the deepest part of their being that they may not get out of that wheelchair, they see somebody else and it gives them hope. And that's really important because there is always hope for the future. And without hope, you don't plan and dream. And if you don't plan and dream, you're not back to your life. People always want to go back to the day before their stroke. I want to see people plan and dream again, because that's the most important part of life. Before you stroke, you planned and dreamed. That's the thing that was robbed from you, really, if you think about it. Okay, I couldn't walk for very well when I got sent home and everything. I had that you get some physical things robbed, and some people have terrible, terrible, terrible strokes. But the thing that's really robbed from you is your hopes, your dreams, and your plans. And I think that it's really important for stroke survivors to somehow come to some level of acceptance about what's happened to them. There's no mulligans in life. You can't pick up another golf ball and take a drop. I mean, it's just not the way life works. So you best deal with it and get on with it. Earlier we were talking about my recovery. Well, and use my words, jump on it. I really encourage people to jump on it. Yeah, neuroplasticity lasts a lifetime, but you have more of it right after your stroke. So when you're sitting around like, oh, I want to go back to the old me, I know I'm being snarky there, and I probably shouldn't. When you're burning neuroplasticity. I see people who say, oh, I finally got into PT. I have an appointment 3 weeks from Friday. I'd say that's 24 days. What are you going to do in those 24 days? You're going to sit around on your butt and wait for PT? Then you're going to go in twice a week for an hour and think that's going to fix you? No, I preach you got to become your own best patient advocate. You got to become your own physical therapist. And you better start a home program sooner rather than later, because you are going to be released. It's not a matter of if your insurance runs out, it's a matter of when. So get all the sheets and set up a home program and start moving that home program along with your physical therapist the entire time. I would suggest doing it on visit 2. They do an evaluation on number 1, so you'd be interrupting them. But on visit 2, you should be talking to your PT about what your goals are, setting mutual goals. If your PT isn't talking goals to you, then you should be asking for another PT.
Yeah, it's taking control of your rehab journey, right? And I think that's what you've done. And it's the same thing, like you go back to that athlete mentality, you're not going to be successful if you go into the start of the season without training for preseason, doing some preseason workouts. And it's the same thing, don't sit on your butt until you start, going in. But I think what you've touched on here, and again, going back to your skill set that you bring in as a patient advocate for this community, you said one thing earlier, and I think it goes to your skills specifically in videography, is the art of storytelling, right? So how have you kind of crafted this to support survivors, right? Because even like the way that you've just kind of talked us through getting, moving and getting folks going early in that process, I think it takes a creative person to be able to motivate an individual like that. So is some of your content, I know you said a lot of it is based on kind of physical movements and things, but do you have any content related to kind of, motivating individuals, educating them on kind of this journey? Or is it all kind of, physical based?
Well, I have the science, I have the in the meetings, and I have the exercise videos. I've also done some stuff with 2 of my friends, stroke survivor friends, Marcus Rosenlinger and Neil Isaac. I basically talk about these things with them. In the case of Neil, I drove 5 hours to meet him and did interviews with him. And when I talked to him, he had the same philosophy as I did. So I asked him loaded questions that would make, I didn't put any words in his mouth. I just asked him very specific questions about, like, what was your aha moment about therapy and stuff like that. And he ended up like I basically feel like I want to get more voices, and I used him as another voice to basically say the same thing. Same with Bob Anderson, and we did a program with Bob. Bob jumped on it like I did, and he may have beat me. He may have beat my record. He was doing stuff at 4 months that I didn't keep exact track. But anyhow, the point is, people who jump on it seem to get better a lot quicker. So I don't know if that answered the question or not, but
Yeah, I think we could kind of wrap up here with our magic wand question. And David, I'll let you kind of craft up the question.
Yeah, so Ralph, we usually at the end of our interview ask everyone our magic wand question. So here it is, and as our low budget, we actually have a physical for our YouTubers, a very inexpensive magic wand. So how would you use this to change the stroke recovery pathway for survivors and caregivers?
okay. Well, I didn't know you actually had a magic wand I could wave. Of course, when I read this question, I thought about it in terms of, I thought about it in terms that there's several different approaches or ways that you could look at it. And the first thing, if you actually had a magic wand, of course, what you would do would be you would wand away. You'd make everybody, all 8 million stroke survivors in the U.S. better immediately. And then you would wand again, and you would eliminate anybody in the future ever having a stroke. But those are kind of conversation-ending magic wand moves. So I came up with a couple of others. This is a question that I don't get asked much, so I did make some notes on it. Mentioned there's several tacks you could take. If I couldn't make everybody better, I'd at least like to make them understand that take ownership of your recovery. The words I use, you used them a second ago. That the cavalry's not coming. You got to take ownership and get on it. Nobody's going to do it for you either. And the PT is like a piano teacher. You have to practice, or you don't get better. And they can't do it for you either. So it doesn't lie, the answer is within ourselves. It doesn't lie in any other people, any other treatment, any devices, in my opinion. Devices are great, treatments are great, therapists are great, but it still comes down to you putting together a plan, putting in your time, and you doing the work. So what other kinds of things? I'd love to see the survivor and therapy communities working together regardless of and within insurance limitations. If we're not, one of my things with Stroke Buddies is if they're not going to give us what we need, then we need to band together and give it to each other. And part of that, of course, if you're a logical person, the first thing you think is, well, I keep banding together. Why not go back to the source and fix the problem? So I would really like to eventually do things like do studies on spasticity. Generate a continuing education that, this, David, you have to take a certain amount of continuing education every year. Some of it's boring. You got to get the points, though. What if you made things for therapists about maximizing neuroplasticity in your stroke patient population? They might think that's interesting. So we could educate therapists as to our specific needs as neuro patients versus ortho patients. Some of the mental stuff. Okay, I interviewed somebody recently, and we were talking about the whole mental aspect, and he told me, he's a physical therapist, Patrick Reese. He said, I introduced you to him. He said, I think a lot of my patients are putting on their game face because I don't hear about this. The biggest eye-opener for me in being in the groups was all the mental issues that people are dealing with. So I'm not sure therapists are fully aware of what we go through. So that would be something. And as far as advances, I think the advances are going to come from medicine. I don't really think that we're going to see any kind of magic bullet anytime soon. It's a condition, not a disease, so it's not curable. Brain cells die, so it's not reversible. So the best, to me, it seems like the best that's going to happen is we're going to get better and better crutches, if you will. And I think that they're going to come from two things: from medicine. You know, look, we have rDNA vaccines now, and they're just learning so much about the way the body works. And the other thing is, I'm a big believer in physics, and I think the more we study body mechanics, physics, so I think that, you know, the whole thing will change. It'll change dramatically, but it's not going to change radically, in the sense that I think you're still going to have to recover from a stroke. But imagine if you could recover. What did I write? Call me crazy, but I think a lot of stroke recovery is based on physics and some knowledge of exactly what motion should look like. Add in some knowledge of what motion should look like, add a cup of neuroplasticity, maybe a soft programmable E-stem capable flexible exoskeleton, another cup of hard work, and maybe you have something. So I think that, like, I know of two motor recovery labs where they're basically studying neuroplasticity and the interrelationship between proper movement and getting signals to the brain. So I think that and medicine are going to be the two things where we see big change in the future. And oh yeah, I should add that actually, you know, while I said I don't think we're going to see a magic bullet, I am an optimist. I hope I'm wrong. So I don't know if it's probably a slightly different answer than you usually get for the magic wand question, but
that's so well said, Ralph. Period. End of sentence. Because you put that recipe all together into, you know, we just need to have a touch of that magic wand to complete the recipe. So, Mike, I'll let you take us out today. We'll put all Ralph's resources in our show notes, and I really want to just say thank you, Ralph, for your time today. Early start for us all, and I really appreciate you bringing a very unique lens and an admirable, you know, effort that you're putting in. And like you said, it's time we kind of change the narrative here a bit. And so, Mike, with that said, take us out.
Yeah, well, I think you did a nice job there wrapping us up, David. And Ralph, again, thank you for your time today. It's brilliant to hear your story, your passion, what you're bringing to a community that is underserved and certainly needs more people like you. So thank you.
well, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind words.
Thank you,
All
Ralph.
right, Ralph. Take care.